Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and this is the Genesis GV70. A little over 12 months ago, Genesis reintroduced themselves back into the UK and Europe, and they did so with 4 new models, 2 saloons and 2 SUVs. Now people were excited that Genesis were back in the UK and Europe, but they were a little bit sceptical because these 4 new cars, well, they only came with petrol and diesel engines. However, Genesis did have a plan, and we did know that there were going to be electric vehicles on the way. Now, roll on just over 12 months and they've introduced a brand new shooting brake, and they've also showed us 2 new electric vehicles with a 3rd one on the way in 2022. But I've got the GV70 here, which was one of the first new cars introduced back into the UK. And under the bonnet, I've got a diesel engine. So I'm going to answer 2 questions for you. Number 1, is the GV70 any good? And number 2, well, do diesels still have a place in a world where everyone's turning to EVs? Stick with me to find out. So, the GV70's styling, I definitely think is a highlight to the car. Way better looking than anything else we've seen from the Germans, and just has this air of luxury and cool about it, just like a Volvo XC60 or even the new Lexus NX. This has definitely turned heads every time I've driven it, but that's probably because I've got the only GV70 in the county, and as a result, everyone thinks I'm a millionaire and I'm driving a baby Bentley, which is no bad thing. But I think as well, this is much better looking than its big brother, the GV80, that I reviewed earlier in the year. It looks less bold and dynamic in terms of kind of being a massive SUV. The curves are all in the right places, and it actually just suits the UK roads better than its big brother. Of course, at the front we've got the Genesis grille and the split headlights to mimic the Genesis badge, and at the back of the car it's just very striking and curvaceous as well. And check out those panel gaps. I mean, this has been built really well, and I think Tesla could learn a lesson or 2 from them. But let me know what you think of the GV70 styling in the comment section below. However, the highlight is the colour, because this is a matte paint job and it's called Brunswick Green, and believe it or not, it's one of 3 matte colours you can get for the GV70. Now that's really cool and very impressive. But yeah, I really love what Genesis have done with the GV70. This is arguably one of the best looking SUVs out there, and I think now it's time we see what they've done with the interior. Sat in the front of the GV70, you are greeted by a very sumptuous, a very luxurious and very comfortable interior. This does feel like a very special place to be, especially when compared to its German rivals. Now, because this is a mid-sized SUV, getting in and out of the GV70 is really easy because of that raised seating position. So if you do suffer from any kind of mobility issues, then this is definitely one car to look at. And then once you're sat in the driver's seat, you find that the seats themselves are extremely comfortable. There is a huge amount of adjustment because I have got the comfort pack for the front seats, and even with the steering, where I've actually got electric adjustment. So actually getting the perfect driving position is really easy. Interior quality in the GV70 is a massive highlight. I mean, there is leather and soft touch plastics everywhere you look. And if it's not soft touch plastic, then it's actually metal trim, and again that just adds to this air of quality here in the GV70. This definitely feels much more premium than a lot of its rivals and what the price tag of the GV70 would suggest. And also because of its design, it feels very special in here as well, and you're not going to get that feeling from something like a Mercedes or definitely an Audi. So that's just something to be aware of. But even the rotary knobs and everything are all nicely knurled, and they've got a lovely feeling of dampness to them. It's just actually really impressive in here, and it's just a very special place to be. I know I've said that already, but you just feel like you are in something special. Cubby spaces in the GV70 are actually pretty decent. Now, we got some decent sized door pockets, but they're surprisingly not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit and you can get a medium-sized bottle of drink in there. Now, on the center console up front, we have got this little lid, and when we open it up, and I do love the way how it's damped, it reveals the wireless charging pad and 2 USB charging sockets. And what I like as well is that you can put your phone in there and close it up and no one can see it, so I do love that feature. Just behind there, we got a couple of cup holders. They're of a decent size and depth. We got some little grippers in there as well, so it will hold your bottle in place, and I do love the fact that it's rubber lined as well. Then just behind there, we got the center armrest, and if I lift it up, we actually have a really decent amount of space. It is lined with fabric, so loose items shouldn't rattle around a bit. We have got a 12-volt socket as well, and also a little tray where you can perhaps put your loose change. So that is, I'll just chuck it in there. So that is actually quite handy. And then we've got the glove box, which is lockable, which I do like. And you do find when you open it up, it's got an okay amount of space. I mean, in typical Hyundai Group fashion, that's not the book pack, but we have got a box of tricks in there. And we've also got your GV70 manual, which I think is in about 45 languages. So that does take up quite a bit of space, but it is lined with fabric, so I do love that feature to it. It's just a shame that when you put all these items in there, it takes up most of the space of the glove box. So that's a little bit disappointing there. But what I'd recommend is perhaps leaving it at home, because you actually have got a manual here on the actual built-in system, so you can access elements of the car that way for you. Something I do love in here is the fact that we have got a lovely mixture of physical buttons and touch sensitive buttons here in the GV70. So we have got some rotary knobs here for the dual zone climate control, but it is actually a touchscreen setup. It is very attractive, and at a standstill it is very easy to use, but sometimes when you're driving along it can be a little bit fiddly because some of the icons are a little bit small. So there's just something to be aware of. Now just below there we have got some physical shortcut buttons for the infotainment system, and then below there here on the center console, up front we've got your drive mode select, and we've got your parking sensor and camera buttons. We've got your volume and tune buttons along with your essentially kind of menu buttons for the infotainment system. And then here we got your rocker switch, which is also a physical button and a touchpad as well, and I do love that feature, and I'll come on to it in a little bit. And then just behind there we got your gear select with your park and auto hold functions. We have then got some touch sensitive buttons here on the steering wheel, along with some physical rocker switches, and then a couple of extra buttons on the right hand side underneath the air vent that do things like your hill descent, your start stop or engine start stop system, as well as your electric handbrake, your boot release system. So all in all, there's a nice amount of buttons in here and touch sensitive buttons, but the mixture I think is more in favour of the physical buttons, which I do like. And as I mentioned, it just gets a little bit fiddly with the dual zone climate control, but once you've got everything set up the way you like it, after a few goes it does become a bit easier to use. But just be aware, as I said, that the icons are a little bit small and fiddly. Now when it comes to the infotainment system and the digital dashboard display, it's a little bit different from other cars in the Hyundai group. So for instance, the infotainment system is a massive 14.5-inch display, and it's operated using the rocker switch, which is also a D-pad and a touchpad as well, but also it's a touchscreen at the same time. So clearly Genesis have looked at the ways of, say, Lexus and realised that having it as a rocker switch by itself may not suit everyone. But they do, I think, want you to use this system as a kind of preference, because the screen itself is a bit of a distance to kind of lean forward and use it, and it can be a bit fiddly when on the move. Now the digital dashboard display I've got in front of the steering wheel is actually part of the innovation pack, and it is a 12.3-inch display, and it is really lovely, very crisp and clear, easy to read. And in typical Genesis fashion, we have got that 3D display which monitors where your eyes are looking, so that way it kind of adjusts as you look at it. Of course you can go for a two-dimensional version if you so wish, but it is a really nice, clever feature. The animations are very crisp and clear, and you're not overloaded with information whilst you're on the move and kind of looking at it on the display. And also the actual infotainment system as well is really good. I mean, I do prefer using the rocker switch. It's only if I use Apple CarPlay or something and I'm stationary that I might use the touchscreen, but it's very intuitive. There's the right amount of sensitivity to it. And yeah, it's very easy to use again when on the move. The menu systems and everything just seem to be integrated really well. Now there are some quirky features here up front in the GV70. So with the dual zone climate control, that's perfect for the driver and front passenger. However, I can actually control it for those in the rear, especially perhaps if you've got kids. So with this sport trim, you do get tri-zone climate control as standard, and I can adjust the temperature as well as the heated seats back there. And I think that's actually quite a novel feature, especially perhaps if you've got young kids and they might be a little bit cold on a winter's day. Something else I will mention as well is that you can actually move the passenger seat from some buttons that are here on the inside of the seat itself. And that is actually quite a unique feature, but it does mean that perhaps some people sat in the back could play a practical joke on the front seat passenger. But on a serious note, if perhaps somebody's affixing a child seat in the back and it's a little bit bigger than you're expecting, you can move this seat out of the way instead of having that person doing it who's actually affixing that child seat. So it does mean you get to be quite helpful. Also, with this particular car, I have got the comfort pack for the front seats, which come with ventilated seats as well. Now, ventilated seats are nothing new. In fact, I've had several cars with them, but because on these seats I've got a mixture of cloth and leather, these are actually the best ventilated seats I've come across, and I think it's the fact that we've got this cloth part on the seat so the air can just flow right through it. So as a result, having a couple of days this week where it's been really warm, yeah, I've really taken advantage of those ventilated seats and they've really been beneficial. There is one other thing as well about these seats, but I'm going to go on to that a little bit later because it's it's definitely a quirky highlight. But all in all, sat here in the front of the GV70, it is extremely comfortable, it feels very premium, and it is jam-packed full of kit. And on that note, I think it's time that we leave the front seats and see what it's like for your rear passengers. Sat in the back of the GV70, it's actually pretty spacious back here, and there are quite a lot of features which I do like. Now that driver's seat is not set to my driving position, it's actually moved back about 5 inches to allow me to get easy exit out of the vehicle. But as you can see, I've still got an okay amount of knee room, and headroom is pretty good as well. I think if you were 6 foot tall, you would actually be comfortable in the back of the GV70, especially once that seat has moved forward. Also, what I like as well is that we've got a little handle here on the edge, so I can recline the seats back. So if I am a taller passenger, I have then got increased headroom, so that is really handy. Now, when it comes to cubby spaces, it's a little bit hit and miss back here. So the door pockets are of an okay size. You could probably only get a small bottle of drink in there, but again, they're not lined with any fabric. Now, we have got a couple of aeroplane style pockets on the backs of the front seats, and we've also got a center armrest, which comes down to unveil a couple of extra cup holders, which is really handy. But disappointingly, we've got no through loading into the boot area, so you can't load any long awkward items through into the passenger area, which is a little bit disappointing. Now, when it comes to kids, we have got ISOFIX supports on the outer seats. Now, there are no plastic covers, but you have got to kind of get yourself between the leather on here, so it can be a little bit tricky when affixing a child seat. However, when you've got kids back here or passengers back here, it's not too dark and gloomy, even though we have got the dark headlining, because the windows are of a really nice size. They do allow a good amount of light in, but they don't open all the way down. However, if there is too much light, you can use the sunshades, which are actually really handy, and it means if you've got kids back here, they definitely don't get the sun in their faces, which is a real nice useful feature. Now, we have got heated outer seats, which are really handy, and they are controlled via this little console here on the back of the center armrest. Now, not only have we got some air conditioning back here or tri-zone climate control back here, but you can actually adjust the direction of the fans. So you've got a couple of vents here, but you can actually have it so it's blowing on your feet from underneath the front seats, and that's actually a very unique feature, and I've not come across that before. Now just below there we have got 2 USB charging inputs, so you can have a couple of kids back here charging their mobile devices. And then next to that we've got a 2-pin socket, so perhaps if you I don't know, want to shave whilst you're back here, then that's a very handy feature. But I would rather that be a 3-pin socket, so perhaps you could have a laptop or something charging in the back whilst you're driving to your next meeting. So being sat back here in the GV70 is actually very spacious, very comfortable, even for kind of taller passengers, which I really do like. And it is jam-packed full of kit. As I mentioned, we have got the rear seat comfort pack in here, and just like the front, we've got lots of soft touch plastics back here, and the only hard plastics are on the back of the seats. So really, it's actually really nice and feels very premium back here, which I do like. And I think on that note, it's time that we exit the rear seats and see what the boot is like. Opening the boot on the GV70 presents you with 542 litres of space. So that's more than a Volvo XC60, but less than a Jaguar F-Pace. In fact, it's very much comparable to that of an Audi Q5. And then once you've got the boot open, you find you've got a nice wide square load area where you can easily get a few suitcases or definitely a few weekend bags as well. And it's not devoid of features either. We have got some nice scuff plates there, so you're not going to damage any of the bodywork when loading any large bulky items in. We've got some very sturdy tethering hooks. We got a 12-volt socket, a little bit of netting here on the right hand side where you can put a couple of items away. And we've also got a couple of levers to get the rear seats down. And when you have, you've got an almost completely flat load area. And then what I like as well is that underneath the boot floor, we have got a little space in order to put your tonneau cover, so you don't have to leave it at home if you are going to take perhaps some items down to the tip or pick up a large bulky item. And then if I lift it up even further, we've got additional space where you have got some netting and your tyre puncture repair kit, but you could also put some items underneath the boot floor and they're not going to get lost or anything. And also it is all covered in fabric, so of course if they roll around they're not going to make any noise. So all in all, we've actually got a nice practical load area here in the GV70, perfect for your weekly shopping runs or if you're going to go to the airport and lug it full of suitcases. But yeah, I'm actually really impressed with the boot capacity and actually the size and shape of the boot. But I think it's now time we take this diesel GV70 for a drive. So once you get driving in the GV70, first impressions are very positive. Now, of course, this being a diesel, you're going to get a bit of diesel grumble when you start the engine up and you get going, but it very quickly disappears. And then you just find that the GV70 is a very comfortable and easy car to drive. It does feel much easier to drive than its big brother, the GV80, which did feel like a very big SUV. Now visibility is actually really good. We've got a lovely commanding view of the road ahead. The A-pillars are quite thick, but I've not found myself looking around them at any junctions. And we have got the wing mirrors, which are of a lovely size, and they have got blind spot monitoring included. So they do actually help with your blind spot and all-round visibility. Then, looking over my shoulder, I do find that there is a thick C-pillar, but it is kind of broken up by a small window to kind of separate that C-pillar. It just allows a little bit of extra light in for your rear passengers, but there is still a bit of a blind spot there. However, as I mentioned, we've got the blind spot monitoring, and something that I love on Hyundai Group cars is that when we indicate, we get the blind spot camera. So it lets you know if anything's there and, well, just to make sure if you're changing lanes on the motorway, not to bump into anyone. So yeah, first impressions when you start driving the GV70, yes, you can hear the diesel, but it does quickly disappear. But it's just a very comfortable, very nice place to be. Yeah, I am smitten by it when I started driving this. I mean, yeah, going by the outside looks as well. What's not to, you know, what's not to like? Now, there are 3 trim levels to choose from in the GV70 range. Now, the website will actually have them in a different order. They will have them as premium, luxury and sport. But in terms of cost-wise, it's actually premium, sport, then luxury, which is your top of the range trim. Now, I've got the sport trim, and this would actually be the one I would go for, because as standard you do get 19-inch alloy wheels. Now, they sound pretty big, but you can go up to 21s, especially if you go for the luxury trim. And as I found out with the GV80, they can just hamper the ride quality a bit. So going with the sport and those standard 19-inch alloys just means you got a little bit more tyre sidewall, so it does mean there's a bit more emphasis towards the comfort side of life. And actually that's a really nice thing to kind of feel. So as a result, the ride is lovely, and I will get into that on that kind of ride and handling segment of the review. Also, in terms of standard kit, you've got pretty much everything that you would want. You've got heated seats, tri-zone climate control, you've got your massive screen and everything with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, yes, this car has got a few options added to it, and they are down in the description below. And I do recommend them, because you've got things like the Innovation Pack, the Comfort Pack for the front, Comfort Pack for the rear, and you've got an eLSD as well. And it does mean that, yes, this car tops out at just a smidge over £50,000 with its options fitted, but I actually think that's a very good price for the amount of car you get for the money. But in terms of just going for a trim level and just having kind of the perfect all-rounder, I think the Sport's the one to go for, because you get a car that still drives really lovely, but there's a little bit more emphasis towards comfort. And in a car like this, that's very important. Now, as I said at the start of the review, that there were 4 cars that Genesis came back to Europe and the UK with, and all of them came with either a petrol or diesel engine choice. So yes, that was kind of putting off some people who wanted to look at the electric option, but I've got the diesel version of the GV70 and I've got no complaints whatsoever. It's actually a really lovely engine. It is a 2.2 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged unit producing 206 brake horsepower and 440 Newton meters of torque, which means that 0 to 62 is carried out in 7.9 seconds. So it's not exactly a slow car, it's actually got a bit of nippiness to it. Now, when it comes to the important side, which is of course going to be economy, Genesis say on a combined cycle I should be able to get around 40 mpg. And I do believe them, because on my daily commutes to work and back, it's around 52 miles. I am averaging around 40 to 41 miles per gallon. The best I've managed to achieve is actually around 45, and yeah, for this type of car, I'm actually impressed by that. Now, of course, here's the big news. There is an electric version of the GV70 coming later in 2022, and that will mark the 3rd electric vehicle from the Korean brand. The first being the GV60, and you can watch that review by either clicking up in the top right hand corner or clicking on the link at the end of this video, and also the G80 electric. So that is the big brother saloon version of the GV70. So you've got the GV80 SUV, and then you've got the G80 saloon. So it's kind of the flagship saloon for the UK and Europe thus far, although there is a G90 coming hopefully in the future. It hasn't shortly, or should I say recently, been announced properly in the US. So yeah, when it comes to the engines, the diesel is actually really lovely with a full tank. It's over 500 miles of range, so that is really impressive as well. I think it's a 66 litre tank you get with the GV70. However, if you want a bit more performance, of course you can go for the petrol version, and that is a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged unit producing around 300 brake horsepower and about 420 Newton meters of torque, but it does mean your 0 to 62 time is improved. However, don't expect the economy to improve. In fact, expect it to be perhaps in the 20s. So that's just something to be aware of. But with this diesel engine, I've actually been really impressed by it, and if I put my foot down now, it's nice and responsive. I've got an 8-speed automatic, that's the only transmission choice. It is a Hyundai made automatic as well, and the power goes through all 4 wheels, so it is permanent all-wheel drive. So there are no 2-wheel drive options available. It is all-wheel drive or nothing, but it just makes the car, well, feel very compliant and very just stable on the road. It's a really lovely combination, and yeah, I do like it. Diesel isn't dead just yet. So what's the ride refinement and handling like in the GV70? Well, I've been really impressed by it. In fact, I'm more impressed by the ride in this than in its big brother, the GV80, and that was because it had the larger 21-inch alloy wheels. With the smaller alloys on this sport trim, it does mean that for the most part, it deals with the bumps and imperfections really well. In fact, you can hear some of the bumps and imperfections, but you can't feel them, which is actually a real nice positive. Now at low speeds, particularly on a poor road surface, the car can wobble around a little bit and just feel a little bit unsettled, and you can kind of move around with it. But the nice thing about this is once you kind of get going and you increase your speed, it feels a lot more settled and a lot more planted on the road, which is a nice positive. And that means you can do a long journey in the GV70 and come out the other end feeling nice and relaxed. And on that note, that actually means the refinement levels are actually very decent as well. Now, yes, we have got a diesel engine up front, and you only really hear it at startup and when you kind of pull away at low speed. Once you get up to speed, and I'm doing about 50 miles an hour now, you can't hear it. In fact, the only real intrusion coming into the cabin is a bit of tyre roar. And I can only imagine having the larger 21-inch alloys, it would actually be a little bit louder in here. So again, in terms of doing a long journey in the GV70, this is the perfect setup for it. The other thing as well is this is jam-packed full of tech and driver aids, and it takes a massive amount of workload off you if you're doing a long journey. And you've got all of the driver aids on here. You've got your radar guided cruise control, lane keep assist, driver aid assist. You've also got, when you go on the motorway, you've actually got highway assist. So all you have to do is tap the indicator and it will help you change lanes. It just takes a massive amount of that stress and workload away from you, which means you can drive a little bit further and still get there feeling nice and relaxed. With all the kind of driver aids and that comfort feeling put together, you've got a really lovely long distance cruiser. And the fact that with a full tank in the GV70, I've gotten, or as stated, over 500 miles of range, you're pretty much laughing. I mean, that's a full cross-country run in the UK at least, completed right there and then. And actually something I do like with the comfort side of the GV70 is that there is a little bit of body float when you drive over something like a level crossing or a small humpback bridge. So for example, here we've got a level crossing, and that feels really nice and refined. And the bridge, there you go, there's a little bit of a bounce, a little bit of body float as the GV70 settles itself. And it just shows again how much this car has been tailored towards comfort than sportiness. So what's the handling like in the GV70? Well, I've been really impressed by it. It's got a nice amount of weight in the steering. You kind of know what the front wheels are doing. For everyday driving, you'll have no issues whatsoever. There's a nice amount of weight in the steering so that, you know, when you're chucking it around the corners at say 60 miles an hour like I am now, you can feel what the car's doing. You can feel the weight underneath, and you've got that security of that all-wheel drive system to know that if you do, perhaps in adverse weather conditions, chuck it into a corner with a bit too much speed, it's not going to let go and understeer. But don't forget, this is not a light car, so it's not really one to chuck around in the corners with a bit of reckless abandon, because what you find is, yes, there's a little bit of lean and roll, and it doesn't reward you in the same way that a Porsche Macan would, because it's not that type of car. This is just meant to get you from A to B in as comfortable a manner as possible, and that you feel nice and relaxed at the other end of the journey. And that's something I really do like about it. Now, as I said, with the weight in the steering, there's that little bit of weight there, so you know what the car is doing, but it's also light enough that it actually makes it a doddle to park. And that's something which pretty much everyone who's going to buy this car is going to be after. So as a combination of the ride refinement and handling as an overall package, It has definitely got its bias towards comfort and refinement, and not the kind of sporty side of the SUV segment. And I'm absolutely happy with that. I think when you look at the GV70, you don't see a sporty SUV. You see something that looks a bit like a baby Bentley. You look at something that has that kind of air of refinement and sophistication about it. So yeah, as an overall package, I'm really impressed by it. I think the GV70 rides, handles, and just drives really nicely. If you want a sporty car, however, there are other rivals out there. But if you also want a car that's a little bit more comfortable, you might have to pay a little bit more. But again, the rivals are out there as well. So yeah, it's a very competitive segment, but Genesis know what they want from it, and that's a definite highlight. So with my time in the GV70, what have been some of the highlights and some of the low points I've experienced this week? Well, highlights have definitely been the exclusivity of the car. I mean, just look at it. It is such a gorgeous car, and I think I've got the only GV70 in the county. And that actually kind of makes me feel like a bit of a mini celebrity, because I've had people actually come up and speak to me about the car and were genuinely gobsmacked and surprised that it's a Hyundai Group car, because it feels so much more premium than they were expecting. And weirdly, the main people that have kind of approached me have been JLR drivers. And it's been a nice little mixture. I've had a couple of F-Pace drivers, and I have had one Evoque and one Range Rover driver approach me and ask me about the GV70. So that was something that I was actually really quite flattered by. And I have a feeling they're going to be speaking to Genesis about possibly purchasing one of their vehicles, because they were gobsmacked by the tech and everything that was on board. So that was a real nice factor. Now, the next thing I've been really impressed with, as I mentioned, has been all the kit and safety tech on the car. Now, in typical safety tech fashion, yes, the lane keep assist has been a little bit sensitive at times, and it does give you a beep and a warning into the cabin, but you can press and hold it on the steering wheel and it will disappear. But I mentioned about the ventilated seats and how I think these are the best ones I've experienced because of the fact we got the part leather, part cloth seats. There's also something else I really do love as well, is the fact of, if I reach down and touch the buttons for the electrically adjustable seats, it actually comes up on the screen and tells me what that particular button does. And I think that's really good and really actually a very, I'm going to say simply clever feature, because it's something I thought Skoda would come up with. Because I've sold cars in the past where a customer has gone from a manually adjustable seat to an electric seat, and when you're sat here and you're reaching down, touching those buttons, you can lose your bearings on what those buttons actually do. So that is a really novel feature. But other than that, I think that's everything really covered here on the GV70. I haven't actually come across any negatives. Anything that I've already mentioned, I kind of would probably bring up now. I mean, the icons, as I said, for the dual zone climate control can be a little bit fiddly. But other than that, yes, somebody playing a practical joke on your front seat passenger by moving their seat whilst you're driving. And that's about it. I mean, I've been hugely impressed with the GV70. I think it's much better than the GV80. I think that's just a little bit too big and definitely thirsty with its petrol engine. But this just feels, yeah, really lovely. Not many cons, but lots and lots of pros. So what are my thoughts on the Genesis GV70 diesel? Well, the GV70 I think is a really lovely SUV. It looks bloody gorgeous, it's very comfortable, it feels special when you're sat in here. The materials and the perceived quality are extremely high. In fact, I would have this over the German rivals. It's just got a uniqueness about it that we're starting to kind of not see from other manufacturers. Also, it's jam-packed full of kit. You can get the option pack, so you can actually tailor the car to however you want it. But also, what Genesis offer you is something very unique to buyers. So there are a huge amount of pros to looking at Genesis for your next car. Of course, the fact that they're only in the southeast of England can be a bit of a negative, but Genesis have said that 50% of their sales in the UK have not been in the southeast of England. They've actually been further spread out across the country. So just because you might live in, I don't know, Buckinghamshire, or perhaps even in Lincolnshire or something, doesn't mean that you can't get access to a Genesis car. You can do. And in fact, Genesis are often doing test drives up and down the country in order to spread their name and get customers interested in their product. So that's another positive. So if you are interested in a Genesis car and perhaps you live in Liverpool, well, you might not have to wait as long as you're expecting. And then comes to the second question that I said at the beginning of the review. Is diesel, or does diesel still have a purpose? Yes, it does. I mean, when this car came to me with a full tank, it had over 500 miles of range in it. And it's got a 66 litre tank as well, so it's not like the biggest tank out there. But I've not had to fill up any fuel. I'm only on just above a quarter of a tank now. And I'm doing 44 to the gallon, so it's actually pretty impressive in terms of economy. The fact is that diesel still has a place here for our cars. There are so many people out there that are still doing 20, 30,000 miles a year, and an electric car just won't be able to cut it just yet. It won't be able to provide them with that true flexibility that an ICE car can. So I definitely think that diesel cars still have a purpose. We still have fleet drivers out there who have to go around to customers around the country and sell their product. You have to go to businesses and go to various destinations on a daily basis. And diesel definitely still has a purpose. It definitely still has a need in today's cars. Now, yes, my hope is by the time we get to 2030 in the UK and we stop building ICE cars, or just ICE cars, that the battery technology in EVs would have gone to their kind of second stage, and we can start seeing realistically 400, maybe even 500 miles being achievable. But that's still a few years away. So in the meantime, diesel cars, they still have a purpose. The GV70 is a very, very good car, and you put them together and you got yourself a very good diesel Genesis. I absolutely love this, and even with the diesel engine, it suits me and my lifestyle very well. My daily commute is over 50 miles. This would suit me down to the ground. So yeah, the Genesis GV70, a really lovely exclusive SUV, and as a diesel, yeah, still has a purpose. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Genesis GV70. Of course, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. Of course, if you've got any questions about the GV70 and my time with it, please put them down in the comments section below, and I'll do my utmost to answer them. Of course, I am on social media as well. I'm on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. I do need to give TikTok a go as well, just to see what it's like. But other than that, yeah, I've really enjoyed the GV70. I actually think it's a really good SUV, and it does suit having a diesel engine in it. I've been really impressed. But guys, have yourselves a wonderful day, stay safe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. So take care everybody, and bye-bye.